First of all, let me say that it was an honor and a pleasure to have had Rena Steinzer as my environmental law professor when I was here at Maryland. There are lots of things that the Attorney General can and should do to protect the environment. Let me first talk about prosecution. We need to increase prosecutions. 10 years ago, there were 12 people in the AG's office, Environmental Crimes Unit. Now there's only 5. That's a problem. I would, first of all, elevate the Environmental Crimes Unit to its own separate division, and I would ensure that it had the proper resources to protect the environment, because our children, our families, deserve to breathe clean air and drink clean water. But let's also talk about mediation. As I learned in environmental law, working with companies to mediate disputes can oftentimes clean up major environmental hazards more quickly, more expeditiously, and more succinctly, and less costly than litigation. And finally, let's talk about prevention. I'll use the office to improve environmental laws. For example, Columbia Gas Pipeline is trying to build a gas pipeline between my district in Baltimore County and Falston and Hartford County. Yet there have been hundreds of explosions nationwide, costing hundreds of millions of dollars in property damage and personal injuries. I have led the fight for legislation that will give the AG's office oversight to enforce pipeline safety standards. Let me be very clear. If you follow our regulations, I'll be with you. But if you pollute, I'm coming after you. I'm going to make you pay. I'm going to make you stop.
I'm sorry, that's time. Thank you. Now this question is going to go to Delegate Brave Boy next.
Thank you. As was mentioned by my colleague, about a decade ago, there were about 5 attorneys and 7 investigators in the Environmental Crimes Unit. Now there are about 3 attorneys and 2 investigators. And as anyone here knows, obviously, most of you are law students, in order to bring a case, you first need to have a successful and complete and thorough investigation. So we are hampered in many respects from our ability to effectively prosecute these crimes by our inability to effectively and timely investigate those crimes. What I would do as Attorney General, because I understand that resources many times are limited by the state, but we should not have our justice limited by our resources, especially if we can use our resources more effectively. Each local jurisdiction has a Department of Environment or Environmental Resources that has the responsibility of protecting and defending the environmental health and well-being in that local jurisdiction. As Attorney General, I would partner with those local departments to assist us in the investigation of environmental issues and complaints in those respective jurisdictions. We must learn to use our resources to benefit the people of this state, and we must work collaboratively between state government and local government to be effective and efficient for the people of Maryland. Thank you.
Look, our environmental enforcement efforts have not been sufficient. You need only look at the state of the Chesapeake Bay to understand that. Part of the problem has been budget cuts that have hurt the Office of the Attorney General, but equally importantly, cut the police force of the Department of Natural Resources virtually in half over the past 6 or 7 years, and at the same time, tripled the caseload of the inspectors at the Department of Environment. I have worked in the General Assembly and been the author of laws that increase the fines and penalties for people who pollute our waters and who rip off our natural resources. I was also the author, with the help of Professor Steinzer, of the law that required the reporting of its environmental enforcement efforts by the Department of Environment. As Attorney General, I would try to capitalize on the resources that we do have. Let me say also that the U.S. Attorney has eliminated its environmental crimes unit, putting more pressure on the Attorney General's office. As AG, I would convene task forces of Department of Natural Resources, Department of Environment, local police, sheriffs, and state's attorneys to prioritize, to pick the crimes that are worthy of the greatest attention, focus on those. Prosecution has to be swift and certain. The penalties have to be tough enough to deter the polluters, and that's what I would focus on as Attorney General.
Delegate Frick.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Professor, for your work on this issue and on a number of other progressive causes, so thank you. Environmental issues has been a priority for me my whole life. I have a 95% approval rating from the League of Conservation Voters, and it's a personal issue for me. I am a two-time graduate of the National Outdoor Leadership School, NOLS, and if you don't know what they're about, but they are an organization that has done a lot to really create the modern environmental movement. I agree with my colleagues. We need to be putting the resources into environmental prosecutions because there's no alternative. We cannot lose our natural resources. We can't lose our wilderness because there's no way to get it back. Sometimes they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, in the environment, sometimes there is no cure. You can't get these things back. I think Professor pointed out that one of the challenges we had was that the U.S. Attorney's Office used to be much more proactive and devoted to enforcing environmental crimes through its Environmental Crimes Unit, but after 2001, that was phased out. I think it's important we have civil enforcement opportunities. That's valuable, and we can use those fines to help pay for more enforcement. But we also need to have that criminal aspect because whereas fines can sometimes be rolled into the cost of doing business for polluters, no one's going to risk going to jail over the cost of doing business.